is Prince Michael Jackson, and I love my daddy.
That's what I'm gonna do on stage.
Imagine growing up behind iron gates on a 2,700-acre ranch with your own zoo, your own amusement park, and your own movie theater, and still having to hide your face every single time you stepped outside. That was childhood for Prince Michael Jackson Jr., the boy the whole world watched grow up, yet somehow never really got to know. Today, we're going inside the life of Prince Jackson, from a hidden infant guarded by his father's biggest star friends, to a 12-year-old forced to grieve in front of 2 billion people, to the grown man now helping shape how his father's story gets told to a new generation. Prince Michael Jackson Jr. was born on February 13, 1997, at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles. His arrival made headlines instantly, not just because his father was the biggest entertainer on the planet, but because almost nothing about Michael Jackson's personal life ever stayed quiet for long. He was named after his father and grandfather, and his mother was Debbie Rowe, Michael's wife at the time. Within days, Michael Jackson issued a public statement asking the press to respect his son's privacy, a request that, in hindsight, set the tone for the rest of Prince's childhood. Adding to the surreal nature of his early life, Elizabeth Taylor and Macaulay Culkin were named his godparents, two of the biggest names in entertainment, standing as protectors of a baby who hadn't even opened his eyes to the cameras waiting outside the hospital. Behind the hospital doors, though, Michael Jackson was simply a new father, doing his best to keep the outside noise from touching his son's earliest days. Those close to the family have described how carefully he tried to insulate Prince from the cameras waiting just beyond the walls, giving him a quiet, unhurried start to life before the public ever got a real look at him. It set a pattern that would define the next decade. A famous father working almost obsessively to buy his children a version of privacy that fame itself had already made nearly impossible. From the very beginning, Prince's world was split into two realities. On one side was the relentless global fascination with anything connected to Michael Jackson. On the other was a father determined to build a bubble of normalcy around his children, no matter how unconventional that bubble looked from the outside. That bubble had an address, Neverland Ranch in Santa Barbara County. For most people, Neverland was a strange, almost mythical property, a place with steam trains, carnival rides, and exotic animals roaming the grounds. For Prince, it was simply home. He grew up learning from private tutors instead of sitting in a classroom, playing near giraffes and elephants instead of a neighborhood park, and spending quiet afternoons with his father, who structured the entire property around imagination and protection rather than luxury for its own sake. It gave him a childhood full of freedom inside the gates, even while the outside world treated his family like a permanent headline. Simple, everyday routines that most children take for granted. A bike ride around the property, an afternoon feeding animals, a movie night at the estate's private theater, became, for Prince, the version of ordinary his father was able to offer him. It wasn't a childhood most people would recognize, but by his own later description, it was one built with real intention, not just extravagance for its own sake. That contrast became most visible whenever the Jackson children left the estate. To stop paparazzi from building a public record of his kids' faces, Michael Jackson had Prince and his younger siblings wear veils, masks, and light costumes during outings. It became one of the most talked about parenting choices of the era, endlessly mocked and questioned by commentators who never had to live with a camera crew following their toddler. But for Prince, the strategy worked exactly as intended. With his face unknown to the public, he could walk through a mall, sit in a park, or grab food without being swarmed. Years later, as an adult, he would describe his father's protectiveness not as strange, but as an act of love, a shield built by someone who understood exactly what unfiltered fame does to a person, because he had lived it himself since childhood. Critics at the time called the practice unusual, even excessive, but few of them had grown up as a child star themselves, watched constantly from the time they could walk. For Michael Jackson, the veils and costumes weren't about secrecy for its own sake. They were a practical answer to a problem almost no other parent on earth had to solve. Behind the headlines, there was also a quieter, more ordinary story unfolding, a custody arrangement. When Prince was 2 years old, his parents divorced, and Debbie Rowe gave Michael full custody of Prince and his younger sister, Paris. From that point on, Michael Jackson was, by every account from people close to the family, a hands-on single father who ran a structured household, valued good manners, and prioritized his children's education above almost everything else, including at times his own career. Rose stayed largely out of the spotlight during these years, and Prince has said publicly that his father was the center of his early life, his teacher, his caretaker, and his emotional anchor. That closeness extended to his siblings. Isolated from typical school friendships and neighborhood life, Prince, Paris, and their younger brother, originally nicknamed Blanket and later known by his own choice as BG, formed an unusually tight bond. Paris was born just a year after Prince, and the two were nearly inseparable growing up, while BG's arrival in 2002 completed a trio who leaned on each other constantly, especially once they were older and navigating a spotlight none of them had asked for. As the eldest, Prince naturally took on a protective role, something family friends and later interviews suggest carried into adulthood, where the siblings remained notably close and supportive of one another's individual paths. Life outside the estate walls wasn't the only place Prince learned resilience. Inside the household, his father ran things with a surprising amount of discipline for a man known worldwide for spectacle. Manners mattered, schoolwork mattered, and Michael reportedly made a point of being present for his children's daily routines whenever his career allowed it, rather than delegating that responsibility entirely to staff. Debbie Rowe, for her part, stayed largely removed from the day-to-day parenting during these years, which meant Prince's understanding of family life was shaped almost entirely by his father's hands-on approach and by the small circle of relatives and staff who helped run the household. One of the more overlooked parts of Prince's upbringing was the education his father gave him in film. Michael Jackson was a serious student of cinema, with a personal collection spanning classic Hollywood, animation, and silent film. Inside private screening rooms, he and Prince would watch movies together, breaking down camera angles, lighting choices, and editing rhythm the way other fathers might break down a football play. Rather than pushing his son towards singing or performing, Michael encouraged Prince's curiosity about what happens behind the camera, how a scene is built, not just how it looks on screen. That early exposure planted a seed that would shape Prince's career choices for decades to come, long before anyone outside the family knew it was there. By the mid-2000s, life for the Jackson family had shifted again. After the intense scrutiny of a 2005 trial and the eventual closure of Neverland, Michael Jackson moved his children between countries, spending time in places like Bahrain, Ireland, and various temporary homes, always with tutors in tow to keep their education on track. For Prince, it meant growing up without a single fixed address for years at a time, adjusting to new cultures and routines while his core family stayed constant. It was an unusual way to spend adolescence, but it gave him an international perspective most kids his age never had access to. He learned to adjust quickly to new environments, new time zones, and new routines, all while keeping up with schoolwork through tutors who traveled with the family. Looking back, that period is often framed as the calm before the storm, a stretch of relative stability abroad before everything in Prince's life changed within the span of a single afternoon back in Los Angeles. Then came June 25, 2009. Prince was 12 years old when paramedics were called to a rented home in the Holmby Hills neighborhood of Los Angeles. His father could not be revived. Within hours, the private, guarded world Prince had known his entire life collapsed under the weight of global news coverage. The shield his father had spent years building, the tutors, the veils, the gated properties, vanished almost overnight, replaced by a level of public attention that no adult, let alone a grieving child, could reasonably be prepared for. Less than 2 weeks later, on July 7, 2009, the world watched Michael Jackson's memorial service at the Staples Center in Los Angeles, a broadcast that reached roughly 2 billion viewers worldwide. For the first time in his life, Prince appeared in public without a mask or veil. Standing beside his siblings in a dark suit, he held his composure through performances of We Are the World and Heal the World, while his sister Paris delivered an emotional tribute that brought many in the audience to tears. It was, in a very real sense, Prince's introduction to the public, not as a mysterious figure hidden behind estate walls, but as a young boy carrying an enormous loss in full view of the world. Just months later, in January 2010, a 12-year-old Prince walked onto the stage at the Grammy Awards alongside Paris to accept a Recording Academy Lifetime Achievement Award on their father's behalf, in front of thousands of music industry professionals and a television audience in the millions. He delivered brief remarks thanking fans for their support and speaking about his father's dedication to humanitarian causes. It was a striking moment of composure for someone so young, and it signaled something about how Prince would handle the years ahead, quietly, and with more maturity than his age suggested. After his father's death, Prince, Paris, and BG moved into the Jackson family's longtime home in Encino, with legal guardianship granted to their grandmother, Katherine Jackson, and later a joint arrangement that included their older cousin, TJ Jackson, who helped provide day-to-day structure. For Prince, it meant adjusting to life surrounded by extended family, aunts, uncles, and cousins, after years of a smaller, more isolated household. It also meant, for the first time, enrolling as a regular student at the Buckley School in Sherman Oaks. Trading private tutors for a real classroom, homework deadlines, and group projects was a significant adjustment. But by most accounts, he embraced it, eventually joining the school's football team and building friendships, without leaning on his family name for special treatment. Teachers and classmates who spoke about him in the years after described a teenager who genuinely wanted to be treated like everyone else, turning in assignments, showing up to practice, and navigating typical teenage social dynamics that his earlier, more sheltered years had never really allowed for. In many ways, that ordinary high school experience gave him something his childhood couldn't: a sense of identity built on his own effort rather than his last name. As a teenager, Prince also started testing out life in front of the camera on his own terms. In 2013, at 16, he joined Entertainment Tonight as a special correspondent, interviewing figures like director Sam Raimi and actors James Franco and Zach Braff during press events for Oz the Great and Powerful. He later took a guest role on the CW series 90210, playing a character dealing with trauma in the show's 5th season finale. Both experiences gave him first-hand exposure to how television and film productions actually operate, and by his own account, they confirmed something he already suspected. His real interest wasn't in performing, it was in producing, directing, and shaping stories from behind the scenes, the same world his father had introduced him to years earlier in those private screening rooms. Where a lot of young people with his level of name recognition might have chased a spotlight of their own, Prince seemed drawn in the opposite direction, toward the technical and logistical side of storytelling that most audiences never think about. That interest eventually became a career. In 2016, Prince founded his own production company, King Sun Productions, based in Los Angeles and focused on visual content, music videos, and post-production work. One of its early projects was producing and directing a music video for artist Amarian's single Automatic, giving Prince hands-on experience managing a production from budgeting through final edit. Around the same period, while studying business at Loyola Marymount University, he co-founded the Heal Los Angeles Foundation with a fellow student, a charitable organization inspired by his father's own Heal the World Foundation. The group focused on addressing child hunger and supporting underserved youth across Los Angeles, and Prince has spoken about it as one of the clearest ways he could carry his father's values forward without simply repeating his father's career. Rather than treating the foundation as a side project with his name attached, he took on an active organizing role, coordinating food drives, lining up sponsors, and showing up in person at community centers to hand out supplies, the kind of hands-on involvement that mirrored how his own father had approached fatherhood decades earlier. Outside of work and philanthropy, Prince found an unexpected outlet in motorcycles. Riding gave him a rare sense of anonymity and control, away from the pressures of being recognized everywhere he went, and he eventually started a YouTube channel featuring helmet cam road trips, bike reviews, and unscripted glimpses of everyday life, sometimes joined by his brother BG, who reviews films and content alongside him. It became a way for fans to see him not as a distant celebrity heir, but as a young guy with a genuine hobby. That hobby came with real risk, though. In November 2017, Prince was involved in a motorcycle accident in Los Angeles when his bike was struck by another vehicle in light rain. He was taken to the hospital and fortunately walked away without major fractures or life-threatening injuries, later posting from the emergency room to reassure fans he was okay and using the experience to talk more openly about safety gear and defensive riding. It was also during his time at Loyola Marymount in 2017 that Prince met Molly Shermang, a fellow student who would go on to become one of the most stable, long-running presences in his adult life. Unlike many high-profile relationships that play out under constant tabloid attention, Prince and Molly kept things relatively private, occasionally sharing glimpses of travel, hikes, and family gatherings, including moments with his grandmother Catherine. Their relationship quietly continued for years, through Prince's business ventures, his philanthropic work, and his gradual return to public life as a spokesperson for his father's legacy. In 2025, after roughly 8 years together, Prince announced their engagement, a milestone many long-time followers of the family had been waiting to see. Molly has appeared alongside him at family events over the years, including gatherings with his grandmother Catherine, and by most accounts has remained a steady, low-drama presence through the busier stretches of his career, a contrast to the constant public scrutiny that defines so much of Prince's own upbringing. Now in his late 20s, Prince Jackson has settled into a role that connects almost every earlier chapter of his life, helping shape how his father's story is told to the next generation. He has taken on a producing role on Michael, the long-in-development biopic starring his cousin Jaffer Jackson as Michael Jackson, and has been vocal about wanting the film to represent his father honestly and respectfully. Alongside BG, he's appeared at premieres for the movie, supporting Jaffer publicly and describing the experience of watching his cousin transform into his father as emotional in ways he didn't fully expect. It's a full-circle moment for someone who spent childhood afternoons in a private screening room learning how movies are built, and who now has creative input on the film meant to introduce his father's story to audiences who never got to see Michael Jackson perform live. Looking at the full arc of his life, Prince Jackson's story isn't really about fame inherited at birth. It's about a kid who was handed an impossible level of public attention before he could even talk, who lost his father in front of the entire world at 12, and who spent the following years quietly building an identity that didn't depend on anyone else's legacy, even while choosing again and again to honor it. From the gates of Neverland to a producer